For decades, Madison Square Garden was the mecca of boxing, its shrine and its capital. Up next, in part one of a special two-part edition of Behind the Fights, boxing historian Jack Newfield takes us through 6 decades of some of the Garden's most memorable boxing moments. We'll see Jack Dempsey tested, Jake LaMotta take a dive against Billy Fox, a fight between Tony Canzoneri and Jimmy McLarnin where the ring mic played nearly as big a role as either fighter's fists, a fight in the ring between Kid Gavilan and Billy Graham that was almost as exciting as the fight afterwards outside the ring, and a young Roberto Duran delivering one of the most famous low blows in boxing history, all at Madison Square Garden, all up next on Behind the Fights. With me is Jack Newfield, expert on politics, psychology, sociology, and of course, boxing. I just want to tell you one quick story, Jack. One day when the Russian hockey team first came to the United States, I was walking down 8th Avenue with the goalie on the team, and he said to me, "Tell me, what is medicine?" And I said, "Well, it's like penicillin, doctors." He said, No, medicine." And I said, "Doctors?" He said, No, Madison Square Garden. We're talking about Madison Square Garden. Explain how easy it is to be confused, even if you speak perfect English.
It is very confusing. There have been 4 versions of Madison Square Garden. The first one was built in the 1840s on the Lower East Side, at the corner of 2 streets that no longer exist. Then it was moved to the 23rd Street and Madison Avenue,
which was really Madison Square.
Next to Madison Square Park, so it became Madison Square Garden, and then it was moved to 50th Street and 8th Avenue.
Which is where it was when I was walking with the Russian.
Right, and then in 1968, it was moved again to above Penn Station at 33rd Street and 7th Avenue.
So almost Herald Square, but it wouldn't sound as good Herald Square Garden.
So
anyway, the first fight we're going to is the first heavyweight championship fight
in
held
the second garden.
In the second garden. Tell me about the first bout.
The first heavyweight title fight in the 23rd Street Garden was Jack Dempsey's second title defense against a guy named Bill Brennan, who he had already knocked out. And it was supposed to be a very easy fight for Dempsey, who was then 25 years old. He had won the title the year before by knocking out Jess Willard, although I think the fight provides some evidence for my theory that Dempsey is very overrated when you're measuring different heavyweight champions of different eras.
The Willard fight shows that, or the Brennan fight?
The Brennan fight.
The Brennan fight shows that, because he did not destroy the man as he was supposed to so quickly?
No, it was pretty much touch and go for 10 rounds for Dempsey against a second echelon challenger. When you look at Dempsey's career, you got to realize he was idle for 3 years as champion. He refused to fight Sam Langford and Harry Wills because they were black. He beat light heavyweights like Carpentier, and he was finally dethroned by Tunney.
He sat out 3 years, though, without being incarcerated. That's pretty good.
That's right.
Let's take a look at Dempsey against Bill Brennan.
Brennan's much faster, much better than anyone thought he'd be. Brennan's down. A left hook to the jaw, followed by 2 rights to the body. A terrific power combination. Brennan's dead game, but he can't make it. It's a knockout. The crowd is cheering for Brennan for his great showing. He made the champion really work tonight. Jack Dempsey retains his world's heavyweight crown.
Jack Newfield and I are back in Victory Yard, and Jack Dempsey has defeated Bill Brennan a 12th round knockout. Do you draw parallels between Dempsey and Mike Tyson?
I think there are some tremendous parallels. They both were fought with great fury. They both were terrific natural punchers with fast hands, but lacked certain other skills of balance and defensive ability. They both married movie stars. Jack Dempsey married Stealth Taylor, and Tyson married Robin Givens. And I think they both had very short primes. And then Mike...
And short marriages.
That's true. Yeah. And I think they both were more comets than stars. And they burned out pretty quickly, partly through fast living.
You and I both missed the Dempsey-Brennan fight. We weren't there at ringside. But you saw Tyson develop. You saw him coming on. Did you see the parallels and the similarities?
Not right away, because I think until he fired Kevin Rooney, I thought Tyson was going to be one of the great champions of all time, that he had such hand speed and such punching power at 21 and 22 that I thought he would just continue to develop. It was only when I think he abandoned his first boxing family that Customato created that he stopped developing. He stopped growing as a fighter and learning new things at 22 when he fired Rooney and went with Don King and John Horton.
What were Dempsey's shortcomings that kept him from being a great fighter, in your opinion?
Well, one was idleness. He had these long periods of not fighting anybody. He ducked great fighters like Sam Langford.
I would think that showed wisdom.
I don't know. I think if you're a great fighter, you got to beat other great fighters, and you can't hoard your reputation for historians like me and you. Well, you got to fight the best.
When we come back, we'll go back into history again. We'll see some more old fights from the old garden.
StansPoker.com. Have it.
Hats and you are back in Victory Yard, and we're talking about old fights at Madison Square Garden. Which fights do you want to talk about now, Ken?
Well, there were two epics in the early 20s that were never filmed, that only still pictures remain. One was Benny Leonard defending the lightweight championship of the world against Richie Mitchell of Milwaukee. And in the first round, Leonard knocked Mitchell down 3 times. And suddenly, Mitchell landed a perfect punch, and Benny Leonard went down and barely beat the count. It was the 4th knockdown in the first round, and Leonard was out of it. He just got up at 9 and was literally saved by the bell. And Leonard at that point was probably the most popular fighter in the world. He came out of the Lower East Side. He was the first great Jewish fighter. He made a thing of never having his hair messed up. He was a wonderful defensive fighter as well as a terrific puncher. And one of the stories that came out after this fight was Arnold Rothstein, the famous gambler,
the man who fixed the 1919
already
World
fixed
Series.
the 1919 World Series, because this fight is in 1921, went to Leonard in the dressing room and said, I have bet $25,000 that you score a first-round knockout, and if you do it, I will give you half. Which is why Leonard goes out and goes for the first-round knockout and runs into this tremendous punch that nearly ruined his career.
That's a boxing switch, offering a guy money not to lose the fight.
Right.
I mean, Leonard was such an ethnic hero. I remember my uncle used to, he loved Benny Leonard. He talked of him as the great box fighter. And you know, he might not have had the lingo down, but he knew how good was Leonard?
Oh, I think he was as good as it gets. I would say that Ray Robertson, Henry Armstrong, and Benny Leonard are probably the 3 greatest fighters ever.
Who were some of the great opponents that Leonard beat?
Oh, he beat Lou Tendler. He dominated the lightweight division for 10 years.
And in the fight in Madison Square Garden, the fight against Mitchell?
He finally knocked Mitchell down 4 more times, but that one moment at the end of the first round where Benny Leonard is flat on his back, and most people think he wasn't going to beat the count. And it took an incredible effort just to get up at 9.
Let's talk about another historic fight. Mickey Walker fighting against
Jack Britton, whose real name was William Breslin.
William Breslin, no relation to our friend James.
I don't think so. Not the way James fights.
So this fight, the major significance of...
This was the first time a title changed hands in the 23rd Street Garden.
Now, who was the champion going into
Jack Britton was the welterweight champion. He had been champion for 9 years. He was a tremendous boxer, came from upstate New York, very quick, great jab. Mickey Walker was then thought of as just a club fighter from New Jersey.
How old was Mickey Walker
Mickey
then?
Walker was then about 22. Mickey Walker later became not just a welterweight champion, but the middleweight champion. He defeated 4 fighters who became light heavyweight champion, and he even fought a draw with Jack Sharkey, who was heavyweight champion.
He became the toy bulldog, and at
Yes.
this time he was just a poodle getting into this thing. And you know, what did he show? Did he show the kind of skill that he would have?
Ferocity, stamina, ferocity, non-stop punching, stepping to the side, hitting you from angles. I guess in modern boxing, maybe Aaron Pryor or Duran had the same style Mickey Walker had, with tremendous aggression, tremendous body punching.
Like many fighters of that day, once he stopped fighting, or maybe while he was still fighting, he opened a tavern.
That's right.
And then he became competitive with Jack Dempsey. Mickey Walker versus, where are you going to go to have a drink, after the fight or before the fight? I'm in Victory Yard with Jack Newfield, who can remember seeing fights even before he was born. But this one was just about...
2 years before I was born.
You just missed this one. This is a 1936 fight, Tony Canzoneri against Jimmy McLarnin. Tell me about the significance of this fight.
Well, I think the 3 dominant fighters of the 30s was the era of great white ethnic rivalries, and the 3 dominant fighters who fought each other 3 times were Barney Ross, who was Jewish, Tony Canzoneri, who was Italian, and Jimmy McLarnin, who was Irish. And this is the fight between Tony Canzoneri and Jimmy McLarnin in Madison Square Garden in 1936, which is famous for an incident that happened just as the referee was giving them their instructions. Before the fight begins, you have to look for a moment where Canzoneri turns from the instructions and heads back to his corner for the opening bell and hits his head on the microphone. And he is badly groggy and dazed.
I mean, there are a lot of fighters who look like they were hit by the microphone.
And he was actually, according to the clips, he was cut. And he is not himself at the opening bell, and he takes a brutal beating in the first round because he's not all there.
It could have been worse. The mic could have bitten him. But you know, with this...
It was a different mic.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't even think they had the same name. Yes, Mike Raffoni. Yes, it was a very good one. With these 3 guys representing the Irish, the Italians, and the Jewish population, did the crowds, you know, split up?
Absolutely.
A Jewish section, an Italian section, an Irish section?
It was a tremendous ethnic nationalism and tribalism. A lot of it was centered in New York City, and you know, in team sports, people root for your town, your city, that the ball club represents. In boxing, in that area, it was your neighborhood, and the New York's neighborhoods were very ethnically segregated. The Jews were on the Lower East Side, the Italians were in Canarsie, Bensonhurst, the Irish were in Inwood, and they were like neighborhood rooting sections. And those 3 fighters, Canzoneri, McLarnin, and Ross, had tremendous neighborhood ethnic followings, and they were among the great champions of all time.
Well, we're lucky now. We're going to see McLarnin against Canzoneri. We're Jewish. We can root for both of them. Let's see the fight.
Ring announcer Joe Humphreys addresses a crowd of nearly 17,000. On hand to witness a scheduled 10-round bout between lightweight champion Tony Canzoneri and former welterweight champion Jimmy McLarnin. This is not a title bout, yet it was to develop into a ring classic. Jimmy McLarnin from Vancouver, British Columbia, lost his welterweight crown a year earlier to Barney Ross. Going into this fight, he was 30 years old and weighed 146 pounds. Jimmy McLarnin. A good left hooker, McLarnin is known as a clever fighter, a strategist who combines ring savvy with hitting ability. Tony Canzoneri became lightweight champion by knocking out Al Singer. Like McLarnin, he lost his title to Barney Ross, but won it back after Ross vacated the throne. Canzoneri is 27 years old and at 136.5 is nearly 10 pounds lighter than McLarnin. Tony Canzoneri. It seems as though Canzoneri always has been pitted against heavier men. He was a flyweight as an amateur, then turning professional, fought his way up as a bantam, featherweight, and lightweight. He's a good combination puncher and hits well to the body. Concluding the introductions, Joe Humphreys announces the names of the 2 judges, Charlie Devlin and Charlie Lynch. The referee, Arthur Donovan. The fighters meet at the center of the ring for final instructions from the referee. And in a moment, round one of this over-the-weight 10-round bout. If you're planning to keep score, remember that in 1936, fights were scored by rounds, with no supplementary point system. Jimmy McLarnin in dark trunks with a white stripe. Round one. They waste no time with preliminaries, you see. Both men get right down to business. McLarnin with a right-left combination forces Canzoneri to the ropes and then misses his shots. Watch McLarnin's right. That was a long right that got home. Canzoneri staggers back to the ropes and holds. He's been shaken up. McLarnin trying for the kill, misses a left. But keep your eye on that left. McLarnin about to miss a right, lands a hard left hook. Look at Canzoneri. He's groggy. McLarnin senses it and seeks to press his advantage. Referee Donovan can scarcely pull, determine Jimmy McLarnin away from the hurt Tony Canzoneri. Now watch McLarnin's right. Again, Canzoneri is sent wheeling back. He's wobbly. Tony comes back with his own right and catches a left at the end of round one. A big round for McLarnin. Here comes Tony with a left, right, and a left. Fast punching by Canzoneri. Look at Jimmy, feinting with head and shoulders. He's trying to lure Tony into throwing punches so that he, McLarnin, can wing in his own counter punches. McLarnin connects with a left before catching a stiff left to the face. More lefts by Tony. McLarnin about to land a right-left combination to the face. Remember, Jimmy holds a 9.5-pound edge over Tony. McLarnin firing long lefts to the face. Watch him duck away from Tony's right, then his left. In this savage exchange, a cut was opened on the bridge of Canzoneri's nose. A long left to the face by Canzoneri. A left hook by Canzoneri. Now McLarnin comes back with his own left. Watch. Canzoneri with a hard right shakes up McLarnin. Following through his advantage, Canzoneri fires another hard right. McLarnin's hurt. Canzoneri going for the kill. Watch him land another right, then a left. Jimmy's wobbly. Now Tony opens up with both hands. By now, the fans in Madison Square Garden were asking themselves, what's keeping McLarnin on his feet? Keep your eye on Tony's right. And again. Good shots, but they failed to put McLarnin down. And it's all over. 10 action-packed rounds that left some 17,000 fans in Madison Square Garden applauding. Tony weathered a stormy first round to come back strong. He had McLarnin in serious trouble in round 9. Here's the official decision by ring announcer Joe Humphreys. Rounds 1 and 8 were awarded to Jimmy McLarnin. All the others to Tony Canzoneri.
We're back at Victory Yard with Jack Newfield, and if the Italian fight fans were with us, they'd be celebrating Tony Canzoneri's victory.
Well, Canzoneri's victory, I think, ushered in about a 20-year period where Italians dominated a lot of boxing's weight divisions. Boxing has always, I think, champions have always paralleled poverty and immigration statistics in this country. And a lot of it, Italians were working class and even poorer from 36 to 56, say, and that was the era.
And the Irish immigration had been earlier, and they had become
the
fighters.
Irish had peaked earlier, you know, Corbett, Sullivan, Tunney, Mickey Walker.
It's amazing that these people could produce such great painters and such great punchers at the same time.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, this was sort of the renaissance of the ring. We're in Victory Yard with Jack Newfield, who has a special interest in boxing and in frauds. And both of those interests came together in a fight between Jake LaMotta and Billy Fox at Madison Square Garden.
1947. This is probably the most famous fixed fight in boxing history. Jake LaMotta was a very good, popular fighter, grew up in the Bronx, was known as the Bronx Bull. And in 47, he was matched with Billy Fox, who was then the #1 light heavyweight contender, managed by Blinky Palermo, a famous Philadelphia hoodlum.
Well, if he was managed by Palermo, that will help explain why somebody might want the fight to be fixed.
But LaMotta had tremendous pride about his chin, and he managed to throw the fight without ever going down. He just leaned against the ropes and let Fox hit him until the referee stopped it. And immediately, as soon as the fight was over, all the boxing writers felt it was a tank job.
It smelled.
Because the odds had fluctuated from 3-1 on LaMotta to 3-1 on Fox in the hours before the fight.
You could understand why Fox's people would want the fight to be fixed, to set him up for a championship fight. Why would LaMotta go for it?
Well, LaMotta, 13 years later, when he was subpoenaed before the United States Senate, LaMotta finally admitted that he threw the fight, but he told the Senate 2 different stories. In executive session, he admitted that he threw the fight for money, that Blinky Palermo, Fox's manager, and Frankie Carbo, the mob's commissioner of boxing, paid him money, and he took a dive. In
those days, you could make more money for that than you could for fighting.
Correct.
Unlike today.
I mean, somebody recently said to me, there's so much money in boxing now, even the fighters are getting some.
And what was the reason he said
But in
publicly?
public, he said he only threw the fight in order to get an opportunity to fight Marcel Sedan for the middleweight title, and this is the motive that the great film Raging Bull about LaMotta's life goes with. So it's a more sanitized motive, that it was just his desire to get a chance for the title that made him throw the fight, not.
And of course, unfortunately, the only footage that's available of the fight is the footage that was manufactured for Raging Bull. So you see Bobby De Niro fighting rather than Jake LaMotta.
And they recreate wonderfully the pride of not going down while taking a dive.
With LaMotta, though, I mean, he was a terrific fighter.
Tremendous fighter. He used to knock out light heavyweights regularly. He knocked out Bob Satterfield, one of the hardest punching light heavyweights of all time.
Now, how about Fox?
He was the first guy to beat, and the only guy to beat Robinson in Robinson's first 130 fights. One of the ironies is that winning the fight on a fix destroyed Billy Fox's self-respect, his credibility on the street, and a few months later he lost his shot at the light heavyweight title to Gus Lesnovich, and he was never the same after this fight. So you have the irony of LaMotta taking a dive and 2 years later going on to win the middleweight title from Marcel Sedan, and Fox, who wins on a fix, somehow got so morally and psychologically corrupted by winning on a fix that he may not have been a winning party to, that it ate him up inside and ruined his career.
Wow. A small postscript. After LaMotta appeared before the Gaffer Committee and testified that he had thrown this fight in 13 years after the fight, I was on a radio show with him the next week or something, and I remember the studio was protected because there was still fear that somebody would take a shot at LaMotta at that time. And I was more nervous, I think, than LaMotta was.
StansPoker.com. Have it. StansPoker.com. Send it.
Jack Newfield is in Victory Yard, and the fight we're going to talk about next, and the fight we're going to see next, is the fight between Kid Gavilan and Billy Graham.
Gavilan is a very good welterweight champion. Billy Graham comes out of the Lower East Side of Manhattan. He's a wonderful boxer, terrific
Sort of a
jab.
consummate boxer.
Yes, who didn't have much of a punch, but a wonderful boxer, and very popular with the fans. And he fought the fight of his life this night.
He also was the inspiration for Bill Hines' novel, The Professional,
Right.
which was based on the life and career of Billy Graham. I remember watching the Ollie Liston fight from Lewiston, Maine, in the ballroom at the Astor with Bill Hines and Billy Graham sitting behind us, and they kept analyzing the fight for me, and I learned more that night than I ever did again until I sat down with you. And so let's take a look at this fight, and then we'll talk about afterwards exactly what happened or what was perpetrated during the fight between Kid Gavilan and Billy Graham.
Madison Square Garden, New York. Kid Gavilan of Cuba, the welterweight champion, meets Billy Graham of New York in a 15-round bout for the title. That's Gavilan in the white trunks. Gavilan won 45.5 pounds tonight. Graham won 45. Gavilan was proclaimed the world's welterweight champion 3 months before, when he beat Johnny Bratton of Chicago in a series of elimination bouts after Sugar Ray Robinson resigned the title. There's no doubt this last round is going to tell the whole story. Why, the experts at ringside can't even agree. Comparing their cards, some show even up to now. Others say Billy Graham is slightly ahead. There's a lot of buzzing and conversation among these experts at ringside. This is really a close fight. A knockout would end all doubts about the winner. And the Gavilan fans are yelling for him to give it to Graham. The fight's over. It's a split decision. One judge votes for Graham, the other judge and referee vote for Gavilan. The winner is Gavilan. Graham is stunned. He can't believe it. He thought he won. Graham's fans are angry. A fight starts in the exit aisle, and the police move in and stop it. Kid Gavilan, the winner and undisputed welterweight champion of the world.
A logical decision by boxing logic. What happened? Why did Gavilan get the decision over Billy Graham?
Years later, Teddy Brenner wrote a memoir which claimed that one of the three
Now, Brenner,
judges...
at the time, was he the matchmaker at the
He was the
Garden?
matchmaker.
Right.
He claimed that one of the judges was paid off by the mob to vote for Gavilan. Most of the boxing writers scored it 9-6 for Graham. The morning after the fight, Jimmy Cannon did this classic column that began, "You're Billy Graham, and you're the welterweight champion of the world, but it'll never be in the ring record book."
And Billy Graham never did win the championship.
Never won
did
the
he?
championship. And this was still the 50s, so I think sports fans didn't really know how to riot. So they threw popcorn and threw paper cups of beer, but it never got out of hand. But the crowd was for Graham to begin with as a native son of New York, and then was justifiably angered by an unjust decision. So it just came to the cusp of a riot, but it never became the kind of riots we would see in the 60s and 70s.
I mean, even if Gavilan did get a present in this fight, he was a talented fighter.
He was a tremendous fighter, and he would later really beat Graham in another fight in Cuba, I believe. He just had an off night, and Billy Graham was at the top of his game. He had that jab working, and the jab was like radar. It kept finding Gavilan.
We're back in Victory Yard with Jack Newfield, and we're going to talk about a fight between Ernie Durando and Rocky Castellani, the second of 3 fights between these men. What made this fight slightly unusual?
What made it unusual and controversial is what happened after the fight was over. The Castellani was a fine boxer, and he won all of the first 5 rounds. And finally, Durando, who was a big puncher, got to him, knocked him down twice, and referee Ray Miller stopped the fight. At the moment the fight was stopped and Durando declared the winner, Castellani's manager, whose name was Tommy Eberly, who later went on to become the head of the Genovese crime family and was executed gangland style in 1972, ran into the ring and started throwing punches at referee Ray Miller. And as a result of that, Eberly was banned for life from boxing, so he can devote all his energies to organized crime. But he completely lost it and just charged referee Miller after the fight. It was a close call. I think Eberly must have felt that Castellani could continue, that he was winning the fight. That was a quick stoppage, and he snapped, as they say.
As they say today.
and assaulted the referee.
How close were the ties to the mob in boxing then? Did the mob entirely run boxing?
Well, I think the mob pretty much entirely controlled certain weight divisions, particularly lightweight, welterweight, and middleweight. Frankie Carbo, who later went to prison, along with Blinky Palermo, controlled dozens and dozens of fighters. One of the greatest fighters of that era, Carmen Basilio, eventually testified to the Senate that he was blacklisted. He couldn't get a title fight until he took the mobsters in as partners in his management, and then he immediately got a title fight with Tony DeMarco.
It's terrible to think of things like that going on in such a good sport, such a clean sport. Our next bout is history, both ancient and contemporary, featuring Roberto Duran, who was fighting 25 years ago when this fight took place, and is still fighting. And this is the bout in which he took the championship away from...
He challenged Ken Buchanan, who was a very popular lightweight champion who had beaten Ishmael Laguna for the title. Buchanan from Scotland was a fine boxer. Duran was an unknown quantity. He had had only 1 fight in the United States before this, where he scored a 1-round knockout in the semifinal at the Garden. He was 21 years old. People were saying he is the next Benny Leonard, the next Ike Williams, but he had never been tested until he came into this fight as, almost looking like an altar boy at 21.
An altar boy. Roberto Duran is an altar boy. Well, there was still much moss to come as we go to the fight between Ken Buchanan and Roberto Duran.
Buchanan with that darting left jab. He's great at slipping punches. The scoring is on a rounds basis in New York with a supplementary point system. That has not scored a knockdown. Yes, it is. Johnny scores it a knockdown. Well, we'll ask him about that later. It's counted as a knockdown. And the challenger is a little over-anxious. It was almost Buchanan scoring the knockdown. Duran certainly a hard man to discourage. Got some of the moves of Nino Benvenuti. He's rocking Buchanan in there, in Buchanan's corner. And that good jab of Buchanan can't keep him off. A powerful left hook by the champion. All I can say, they'd better be in shape for the long haul. Oh, he really hurt him that time. A left and 2 torrid rights, and he's still after him. Buchanan's in trouble. He's got a sturdy chin, but he needs it. Over in Buchanan's corner again. He was whipped with that right-hand punch. I don't think Buchanan has ever been in this much trouble in his whole career. Johnny Lobianco getting him apart.
We're back in Victory Yard with Jack Newfield, and we're 1/3 of the way into the scheduled 15-round fight between Ken Buchanan and Roberto Duran. Your thoughts about Duran?
Well, I think you're starting to see in this fight that elemental street fury of Duran's. And my favorite story that captures that is that when Duran fought Sugar Ray Leonard in Montreal in 1980, I happened to be sitting ringside between Pete Hamill, who was on Deadline writing a story for New York Magazine, and Joe Frazier, the former
Who was
great
not
heavyweight
writing,
champion. Right. And as the fight was unfolding, and Duran was just fighting with this maniacal rage, Pete kept whispering to me, he's fighting like Frazier. He's getting low. He's throwing these left hooks. It's just like Smoking Joe. And then we're all standing waiting for the decision, and Pete, who's on Deadline, leans over and says to Frazier, "Does Duran remind you of somebody tonight?" And Frazier says, "Yeah, he reminded me of somebody." And Pete takes out his notebook, assuming Frazier's going to say, "Yeah, he reminded me of me." And Pete says, "Well, who did he remind you of, champ?" And Frazier looks up at Duran and says, "Charles Manson."
Okay, you be the judge. Which one was he more like, Manson or Frazier? There was a little bit of both in him, I guess. Okay, we're going to go back to the fight. We're going to skip round 6 through 10 and come back, rejoin the fight in the 11th round, Ken Buchanan and Roberto Duran.
Need I say that Buchanan's in trouble? Ten seconds to go in the round. Duran talking to Buchanan now. Got 2 rough rounds ahead of him. No knockdown there. 10 seconds to go in the round. Buchanan went down after the bell, claiming a low blow. Buchanan went down after the bell, holding his groin. Dr. Edward Campbell of the commission has gone in. Now Buchanan is getting up and going to his corner. He is in severe pain. I'm going to try to get the referee, Johnny Lobianco. There was a flurry of punches at the bell, and all of a sudden, Buchanan just caved in and went down. Gil Clancy is talking to the referee, Johnny Lobianco. And let's see what's going to happen here. The referee may be stopping the fight, I don't know. The warning whistle has sounded for round 14. It's a question of whether or not Buchanan will come out. The fight has been stopped. The fight has been stopped, and the winner and new lightweight champion of the world, 21-year-old Roberto Duran of Panama. There's pandemonium in the ring as people are trying to get in there. The police are trying to keep them out. There's a mob scene. Hey, Joe! Hey, Johnny! Johnny Lobianco! Johnny! Hey, get Johnny. I'm trying to get the referee over here. I'm going to talk to Johnny Lobianco. Johnny, tell us what happened there at the end.
He apparently got hit just after the bell rang. I didn't think it should be counted. He was unable.
Was he hit? Was he hit low?
He seemed to get hit in the lower part of his abdomen. Wasn't a low blow.
You don't
It's
think it was in the groin?
impossible to be hurt by a low blow without foul.
All right, yeah.
Without tail or cup.
Well, tell me, did you stop the fight?
Yes, when I saw the condition that he was in, it was very, very obvious that he was in no condition to continue.
Well, you're going to stop the fight anyway, even if he didn't go down.
No.
You were
Not until I saw the results of the knockdown.
I see. All right, thank you, John. There you have it. The referee, Johnny Lobianco, stopped the fight. Now let's see this on a replay. Let's see if we can see a low blow. This is towards the end of the round. Buchanan's back to the ropes, and the referee in the way. Apparently he's been hit already. It looked like a left hook to me. Marshall Reed of the Long Island Press is here. Marshall, did you see the punch? No, I couldn't. Lenny Lewin of the Post, Ed Friel of the Newark News. There's an excited Panamanian crowd.
Did you see anything? Couldn't tell. Nothing. He was hurt.
Let's see it again. Let's see it again now. It could very well have been in the stomach, as the referee told us. Here's the announcement by Joe Bostic.
Official decision. The bout terminated at the end of the 13th round. Referee Johnny Lobianco rules that Buchanan is unable to finish. Therefore, the new lightweight champion of the world is Roberto Duran.
Jack Newfield is still wincing from the blow that ended the fight. A little bit controversial there.
Well, doubly controversial. It was after the bell and probably low. But the referee ruled that Buchanan, who was clearly losing the fight at that point, could not continue and declared Duran the new champion. But you got that sense from that moment of this street savagery of Duran at age 21.
Buchanan was not a bad fighter himself.
He was an excellent boxer, but you can't fight Duran unless you can keep him off.
Duran said that in many ways Buchanan was the best opponent he ever faced.
It was very skillful. I mean, I would think that he might reconsider, and if he saw Tommy Hearns knock him out with one punch and later in his career, but and he may have been, trying to flatter Buchanan, or maybe he may still be guilty about that punch.
Well, yeah, he might have felt guilty, but also later in his career, Duran reconsidered a lot of things
Yes.
at a lot of different times. Jack, thank you for being with us, and thank you for being with us.
Ladies and gentlemen.